All right, welcome back to the basement. I had no intentions of filming anything on this particular project because, well, it's not a bass. It's not even a baritone. It's a guitar, and it's a crappy one too. So basically, here's what this thing is. This is a no-name beginner guitar from the 80's. This was my brother's first electric guitar. This was probably the first electric guitar I ever touched or put in my hands. It used to be red. It was a gloss kind of fire engine red when he first got it. And years and years and years went by. He decided he wanted to strip it down and do this to it. And really, it's not really playable right now. So there's a bunch of things jacked up with the hardware. As you can see, this is a plywood body. So this is, nothing but the best here. The sanding job has been pretty bad. It's just a piece of junk. Anyway, my brother gave it to me because I gave him an acoustic guitar. And I don't want this. I have no use for it. I don't even like guitar. I mean, I like it. I just, personally, that's not my cup of tea to play. I'll play one when I need to, but it's not something I'm aspiring to even be good at or proficient even. So my thought process is, well, what if I return this back to him in better than new condition? New hardware, new electronics, same wood, but it gets a custom paint job and maybe some other cool accoutrement, so to speak. So basically, I'm gonna dump a ton of time and money into a piece of crap guitar and give it back to him for his birthday. So that's the plan. So I'm gonna cut to a bunch of time lapse, and I'm just gonna record the process. I really had no intention of filming anything on this, so it may not be the best videography because I really don't care. I just want to get this done. I've only got about a month to get this done, to include cure time on the paint and procuring any of the parts and things like that. So I know I'm going to replace the tuners. I know I'm going to replace the bridge, which is a tremolo bridge. So I'm looking at just some entry-level Wilkinson stuff, and probably find a loaded pick guard and slap that puppy in there and call it good. So that's the plan, but I got to sort out this plywood body first because it is freaking gross. Let's get after it. I'm tempted to make a new body just to get practice, but if I make a body, why don't I make a neck? And then it gets quickly out of hand. So I'm going to return this body back to an awesome looking condition. Better than awesome. All right. So here's the loaded pick guard. Just has a ground wire going to the output jack. So I'm just gonna snip. All right, so first I'm gonna take all the hardware and electronics out of the body, including the tremolo. And I'm gonna remove the neck and everything else. I'm also going to do the headstock on this particular neck, so that means I'm going to remove all the crappy tuners. I think one or two of them was broken anyway, so I'm going to replace all the tuners with some brand new Wilkinson stuff. I like block inlays. I may give him some block inlays, since I have to do a bunch of crap to this fretboard anyway. So I got to figure out what to do with this body, what I want to do with it. I don't know yet. So I'm going to give this a think. I should probably sand it down right now, but I don't want to, so I'm not going to. So first things first, I'm going to take this weird kind of blue-green matte stain or paint. I don't know what my brother used when he refinished this. I don't know if it was a stain or if it was just a paint that he rubbed on, but there was no clear over top of it. It's not sealed. It's open grain, open pore wood.
So I need to take all that off. As I'm going through, I noticed the guitar has been dropped on the strap button, and y'all all know what that looks like if you've ever done it. So the strap button got pushed inside the body. So here you can see me plugging that with a drumstick. A little sandy sand to get it all nice and flush. And I'm going to use the oscillating spindle sander also to do kind of inside the horns and around the edges now that I've switched it over from belt mode to spindle mode. You know, I've seen a ton of woodworkers use this tool. A lot of people have this tool. I did not know how great this thing was, but it was worth it. If you look around and are patient, you can find them on Marketplace or something like that. I think I picked this one up for $100, so that's far less than the cost of actually buying one brand spanking new. But I probably would pay full price for this if knowing now what I know about it. So it's a good buy. So I'm doing all of just the rounded edges that transition from flats to round. I'm doing all that by hand. Working my way up through the grits. I think I go up to 120, and then I start trying to kind of grain fill using some drywall compound or spackle. The first coat didn't go so well, so I did come back and sand it all off, having not filled much of anything with it. And what I then did was I kind of made it into a more viscous paste by thinning it out with some water, and that seemed to actually be really, really helpful. I was concerned that it would raise the grain too much, but again, I'm going to go back and sand afterwards. So I did this a couple of different times, as you'll see. I don't think I filmed all of it, but I did go back and do this a couple of times as I was trying to get this grain to really fill in. Obviously, with the plywood, the poplar plywood that this body is made out of, there's lots of cross grain, especially on the top layer of veneer. When I sanded through, or when my brother sanded through initially when he first refinished the guitar, it went through the top layer of veneer and into a cross grain veneer, so that had to be dealt with. I didn't want to take much thickness off, so I chose to grain fill instead. The edges were the biggest pain, and quite honestly, I probably could have done a little bit better job in hindsight, but it turned out pretty good. So I believe this is the last coat that I'm putting down, and this is definitely one of the ones that I diluted down. And at this point with this particular coat, I feel like I got as good as I could before I switched over to the high fill primer paint that you'll see in just a moment. All right, this is the final sanding before I go to primer. So I'm really taking my time to be meticulous with it. So I'm sure you notice that I don't bother trying to remove the paint from inside of the routed cavities. That's because I kind of want some evidence of what the original body color was, but also I'm going to paint over this, and it's not really going to affect anything to not remove that and take that down to bare wood. It's way more trouble than it's worth. So off camera, you can see that I've been grain filling also the top of the headstock, because there was a couple of dents and dings that I wanted to fill in and seal before I went and started to apply primer and paint. So gave it the same treatment just so that it would look the same. So there is a neck tilt adjustment hole in that particular neck pocket, so you saw me clearing that out with a screwdriver. That's what I was doing. And just once again, I'm going over all the transitions. Now, I didn't film the painting, or at least the first couple of coats of primer, on camera, because I'm going to sand that mostly back and kind of see where I'm at. And then I'm going to start doing all the rest of the body modifications. I just wanted to get an idea of how good the spackle sealing step was and get that kind of sealed in and protect it before I start kind of making changes to the body itself before I finish up the primer and start moving on to actual paint. Here I found some dents and dings that I didn't like on the headstock that I guess I missed. I tried filling it in with super glue, and yeah, don't use super glue to fill in wood. Here's the main reason why you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that because it's going to be harder than the wood that you're sanding and removing around it, and basically the wood around it is going to wear out faster than the super glue. So unless it's something super minor and you're using a thin super glue, I wouldn't recommend it. So now I'm test fitting all the hardware, including the new trim. This is going to be a Wilkinson trim. I'm using just the standard pick guard because I'm going to make a template based off of that pick guard to be able to replicate it out of some blank pick guard material. I feel like that's really where it needs to be. So that means I got a little gap I need to figure out how I'm going to cover. That's what I got to figure out. So here I'm trying something experimental. I've got a very small gap that I need to kind of fill in and make disappear. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to use a toothpick. Actually not a toothpick, it's a bamboo skewer. So I'm drilling into the body and sinking a bamboo skewer in there, and I'm using that as basically something substantial tied to the body to give that epoxy that I'm pouring in there something to stick to that's not gonna just like snap off of the primered body. So that gives it a little bit of a mechanical hold, and then I'm just gonna fill that in just enough, because like I said, I'm just trying to fill the gap between the bridge and the route that was for the old bridge. This ends up working out pretty successfully, so I'm happy with it. But again, that whole point of that bamboo skewer is to create some sort of mechanical bond for the epoxy to stick to. Okay, so I've since discovered that the tuning pegs are too big for these holes, so I gotta widen out these holes. Brad point bit is not the right bit to do that. I did get some other bits, so I will figure that out in just a moment. But I think the things that I'm most concerned about right now is finishing up everything that would require that I do it before I finish my painting process. So I think what I'm going to work on now is anything that's going to require potential touch-ups to the body work, because there's still a bunch of big gaps that are going to have to be filled in with either, I don't know how I'm going to fill some of these in, but it's starting to come together. I'm probably going to need to do a couple more, particularly on the back. I might need to do something to fill in some of this grain, because I think I sanded off all the drywall compounds. So I'm going to sand back the primer and see how much further I have to go, because I've got this epoxy work that I did at the last part. Let's see what that looks like. I gotta file that down. Actually turned out quite good. So there won't be any gaps where the bridge goes in. So that should be cool. That's pretty solid and it's pretty flush, so I'm happy with that. While I'm working on the back of this thing though, I decided I didn't want to reuse a plastic cover plate. Instead, I want to use this piece of oak firewood that I milled and epoxy filled with the cracks and stuff just to stabilize it. There's just tons of Rayfleck in this grain. It's probably not showing up on camera quite well, which is fine. But I think that would look pretty cool on the back, because it doesn't matter if it matches the paintwork or anything else, it's on the back. But I want to add just kind of a cool touch, something that I would have wanted to put in this guitar from the start. I'm worried about using the part with the this giant knot in it. I just don't know how flat it's going to stay. This has got a lot of work to get it nice and flat, and I don't have a big drum
big drum sander, and it's too thin to run through my planer, so I'm gonna have to do it by hand, which is totally cool. I can do that. I've got a big belt sander, hand powered belt sander, and I've got several hand planes, but it's not gonna work with a hand plane. It's just too cross-grained. So that said, I need to make a template, and yeah, so let's get on with it and stop talking.
So one of the things that playing this in super fast mode, 20 times speed, is it doesn't show the drill bit grabbing the headstock and yanking it up the spiral of the drill. I think I had the speed wrong, or I just wasn't holding my piece down well enough. But anyway, it grabbed it, I think 3 or 4 times and created a bunch of tear out despite my best efforts. So I'm going back and filling them in, and like I said, I'm patient, and I'm using super glue, which is not recommended. On the back of the headstock, it's not too worrisome, but on the top it is. So again, the problem is everything around it is going to be softer than that super glue, and it will wear away when you start trying to sand it flush. One way to mitigate that is to use a card scraper or a razor blade as a scraper and get it flush before you start finish sanding, or use a thin or super viscous super glue with some sawdust. That seems to work pretty well. Right now I'm fine tuning the epoxy fill that I did to close that gap between the bridge and the body. And now I'm drilling spots for the threaded inserts to go into the body for the new bridge. Now that I've got all of the body work for the most part done, I'm level sanding, and then I realize, hey, I don't want the tremolo cover plate to be proud on the body the way it was from the factory. So I decide I want to inlay the trem cover plate in the back, which means I gotta make a router template. So that's what I'm doing here, because I'm cheap, and I know that the one router template I've got from the 73 Fender P-Bass, I'm never going to inlay a square that size again. So I'm just adding a bigger hole to that template to use for the current purpose that I have. It's a good way to recycle a perfectly good piece of MDF. I do have that one jazz bass pickup, the bridge pickup, in that piece as well. So all right, masking tape and super glue trick to anchor that down to the body. A couple clampy doos. And I'm using, I believe, it's a 1/4 inch shank, 3/8 inch diameter, top bearing pattern bit on my router. So now that I've got that, a little more cleanup sanding, and I think all the body work at this point is done, and I can finish up with all of the high fill primer, which I think I blow through 3 or 4 cans on this, which is stupid expensive. I think just on paint I've probably got $150 in this guitar just on paint to include the high fill primer. That's why I don't recommend ever trying to work with a plywood body like this. That I since found some better grain fill, so I could probably have gotten away with a better solution than using 3 or 4 cans of high fill body primer. But yeah, it's just a lot more hassle than it's worth. At the end of the day, I could have bought a Warmoth body or something from Eden Allen or Allen Eden or whatever the other online company that sells body blanks, and it would have been way cheaper, and I wouldn't have had to done nearly as much prep. But you know, I'm salvaging a guitar for sentimental reasons and for reasons of practicing my craft, so it's worth it. All right, as you can see, I've got more body primer on here, and just touching up weird spots before I do the final coats of primer. So every time I do one of these touch-ups with the super glue and accelerator, then I end up going back and having to do another coat of high fill primer. Now I am finding some bigger gaps in some of the grain, where especially where there's edge and grain going through on the different plies. So at this point, I'm just trying to make sure I get all those before I put the last coat of high fill primer on here. Again, I mean, the high fill primer is working well. It's just a very expensive solution. It does help you see better all the different gaps. Again, I would have hoped that the spackle paste that I used would have taken care of all this, but unfortunately it just sands off way too easy. So I think next time I do something like this, I'm going to use a legit grain filler rather than trying to do a bootleg homebrew.
All right, I'm finally back in the shop working on this plywood Strat again. It's been a long process of just trial and error, bad luck with spray nozzle tips, and just sanding back too far in between coats to level things off, and trying to just really attack all the grain filling that needed to be done in this plywood. So before I shoot any color on this, I want to make sure I cannot see any of the plies on the edge grain, on the end grain, or anywhere else. And if you remember the last time you saw this in bare wood, it had cross grain, it had like remnants of a cross grain ply going perpendicular to the grain pattern that a normal non-plywood guitar would have. So that was less than ideal. I did do some drywall patching with that, watered it down and did it again, and it worked way better that way. You saw in the last clip, I started experimenting with super glue, and that made things worse as I would try to sand that back. The wood around it would sand faster than the super glue, so I abandoned that, went back to the drywall compound. And just, you know, that was just purely out of impatience and wanting to shoot more primer over it that night is why I went with the super glue route. Bad call. Went back to the drywall compound, worked better, sanded at the same rate as the plywood, so it didn't cause any issues. Shot it with more primer, sanded back, shot it with more primer, sanded back, just trying to fill in all the grain. So I want to make sure that after I would rub it down with naphtha between the sandings and sprayings, that I was eventually getting to a spot where I've filled in all the grain and can't see anymore. I think we're there. It's been about 5 more trips of primer and primer filler. I've used 4 cans. I think 4 cans of primer, 2 cans of primer, 2 cans of filler primer. Way too much. But a lot of that was my fault. I was sanding back too far, chasing out some imperfections that I should have addressed with the first couple of coats of primer. I was thinking it would just resolve itself, and it didn't. So again, learning experience, happy to do so on something like this. I don't think I will look forward to attempting another plywood body ever again, but if I do, I have a better approach on learning how to paint it. So happy to have learned those lessons on this. So what I'm gonna do right now is the last can of primer that I bought had kind of a splotchy nozzle that I didn't address until after like the second coat. So I've got a little bit of a little bit of prep work to do before I can start shooting the first base coat of silver. I'm going to do a two-tone silver burst, kind of on the take of a Fender, I think it's called Mercury, is what they call that particular paint scheme, where you've got like a darker pewter, darker silver bursting into a light silver on the center. I think it's going to look pretty cool. As a friend of mine is interested in potentially asking me to do a base of his for his wife, actually. It's an old 80s P base. It's actually a really, really cool one, but she doesn't like the color. It's like a bright lipstick, hot pink. It's just not her jam anymore. So saw that, liked it, so I'm going to try it on this guitar and see if I can't get it looking pretty good. And I'd rather test it out on something like this that's less consequential. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm going to sand this back. I think I'm going to go 400 grit. I'm just trying to barely knock the edge off. If I should make any wood show, I've gone too far, and that's a problem. So I'm trying to really be disciplined with my sanding and not do that. I've got a paint blob on the edge of this headstock, which I think I will have to go back through to bare wood. I don't see a way around it. But I'm pretty sure in that one spot we should be okay with just the silver going on that. So I'm not worried about the wood not being sealed there. So that's where we're at. Back to the time lapse and voiceovers.
All right, now I'm doing my final level sand prior to color. I think I'm either using 320 or 400 grit. I want to say it's probably 400 grit. This is after my third can and probably 12th or 13th coat of high fill body primer. So now I got that final sanding done. Obviously dusting it off, and I think I'll wipe it down with some naphtha and then start spraying color. So again, I'm going with a silver burst, so you can kind of see the paint coat I'm using for the lighter silver. If you zoom in, I'll put a caption. And I'm just using Duplicolor automotive paint. So I'm doing, I think every hour I'm doing a coat. I think I do about 4 coats of the silver before I move over to try and do the burst.
Now that spot I can fix with a little silver. It's going to get covered up by the pick guard anyway, so I'm not terribly worried about it. But dude, heck yeah, for a first attempt, headstock was a problem. I may have to redo that. But yeah, for a literal first ever attempt, and that's not even a conical spray nozzle. That was with a flat spray nozzle. It's not terrible. Could be a lot worse. So, all right, I'm gonna walk away from this. I'll come back to it, see if I still like it, and see what touching up I need to do with silver.
So I'm touching up a little bit of the burst and just kind of, I don't know, making it a little bit more apparent, particularly on the headstock. And at this point, I'm kind of happy with it, so I start shooting clear over it. I think in the end, I do about a dozen coats of clear.
All right, thank you so much for watching this first episode in the series of this 80s Stratocaster copy project. This plywood body was an absolute nightmare to get ready for paint. But as you can tell, at least by the end of this first episode, we've got a pretty decent burst going on. So join us for the next couple episodes. I think there's going to be 3 or 4 in this series. We'll just have to see how the editing process shakes out. I'm going to try and get an actual guitar player to do the demo at the end of the series so you can hear how it sounds, in addition to how much better it looks by the end of the project. But until then, Thanks for joining me down here in the basement.